So just before we get cracking with implementing Hive into our application, I just wanted to go through a bit of the documentation and my understanding of Hive as a framework. So Hive is a NoSQL database, and I suppose the next question is what is a NoSQL database? NoSQL databases are non-tabular and store data differently than relational tables. NoSQL databases come in a variety of different types like key value and document and graph, but I mean we don't really need to know what a NoSQL database is, we don't need to know what the different types of NoSQL databases are. All we really need to know is that Hive is a NoSQL database, and all data stored in Hive is organized in boxes. A box can be compared to a table in SQL or a relational database, but it does not have a structure and can contain anything. So before you use a box, you have to open it. Seems fairly obvious in speaking, but I mean it's a simple, that's a bit of a gotcha. You need to make sure the box is open before you can access any of its contents. For regular boxes, this loads all of its data from the local storage into memory for immediate access. And just a little bit of pseudocode for how to do that is assigning this variable called box to whatever the end result of await hive.openBox test box is. So let's just break down what this source code is actually saying here. So we've got this await, which if you are aware of .NET, you would await an asynchronous task. That's what a future is in Flutter. Flutter uses futures, which is just essentially their way or their notation of an asynchronous task. So we're awaiting the future or the asynchronous task that this hive.openBox function will return. The E within the brackets here is just generic, so this would be T in .NET. You just essentially pass in whatever type you want to retrieve from this box, so string, integer, a map of an object, etc. That would be what you pass in there. You're just telling Hive, I would like to open this box that happens to be named test box. I'm telling you that this box is filled with strings, or this box is filled with integers, or whatever you may have in this box, and I will go off, execute that task, and at some point return that and make this box accessible via this box variable here. And just as we open a box, we also need to close them. You don't necessarily run into many serious performance detriments by not closing the box, only if your application is small. I mean, if you've got a couple of boxes and you open them right at the very start of the app and you never close them, you can access them wherever you want, but you never close them. You're not going to see massive performance deficiencies here because you don't really have a lot of data to work with. You've not got a lot of boxes. However, if it's a larger application, it is highly recommended that you only keep a box open for the exact amount of time that you need it. You can open and close a box as many times as you want. It's not like a one and done thing. It's just highly recommended that a box is only open for the period of time that you need access to it. So open it up, do what you need, and shut it. Even if you don't have many boxes in your app, it's a best practice, even just to get the hang of it and become, make yourself accustomed to doing that, because it's what Hive recommends, and it's even easier to close a box than it is to open one. You literally just await the future or the asynchronous task of box.close. Don't need to pass anything. This box is a reference back to this open box variable here. So if this was student box for me over here, this would just be await student box.close. So if we just take a look at Hive in terms of the performance attributes of it, this graph here is taken directly from the pubdev page. for Hive. And I mean, for me, this is all the convincing that I need that Hive, at least until something better potentially comes out, Hive for me is my go-to choice for implementing local storage in my mobile applications. So much more efficient than shared preferences in terms of writing data. All we had to do was read. Then, I mean, as I said before, it's your personal opinion which one you would rather implement between Hive and shared preferences. But when we compare reading and writing, which is pretty much part and parcel of what a database has to do, you've got to get the data in there before you can access it and read it, and that's where Hive really shows its stripes, really, or earns its stripes. Let's actually get cracking with some code and see how we implement Hive into our mobile applications. Okay, so now we're actually in the code. I've done absolutely nothing other than in VS Code I've created a new Flutter project that will then essentially give you a load of boilerplate, or not boilerplate, it'll give you a sample app that we can see running on the emulator at the side here. The only difference, so all this sample app does is every time you press this floating action button, it increments the counter by 1 that we can see in this method here. But this isn't a tutorial on Flutter. I can do a beginner's guide to Flutter in a different video. This one's about Hive. So let's first start by jumping over to the pubspec YAML and importing a couple of libraries. I think that's it. So I'm going to save this file, and this will in the background do a Flutter pub get, which just essentially says like, right, okay, cool, I can see that you've told me to go off and get these libraries. I'm going to do that for you. So let's set Hive up, shall we? So dead easy, and takes just a couple of lines, but it must be done as the first step in your application. Has to be done first. Have to set up Hive, first order of business. And all that takes is I'm going to set up a final app directory variable here. You can call whatever you want, and I'm going to await get application documents directory, and as you can see, that's automatically imported path provider, because this path provider library here gives us access to the application support directory, which is essentially the place in the local device where Hive will store things to. And then I will do hive.init. This is a hive.initialize, and I'll pass in this app directory.path. So I'm just saying initialize Hive at this location. And then lastly, I'm going to do hive.openbox, and then I can pass in whatever name I want here. So I'm just going to call it student box. Now we've got a couple of squiggly lines. Let me import Hive. It didn't do it automatically, and you'll see that we're awaiting something here, but we're not doing it. We're just doing it within a sequential method here. So easy solution. Just make the main method asynchronous, and now we can await this future, in which case this future happens to return a directory. And if you remember back to the start of the video, all a future is in Flutter is essentially their version of a asynchronous task in .NET. So that's Hive sorted. Now I have initialized Hive at this location, and I've opened a box within Hive with this name. Now currently, if I was to do something like this, like Hive var, I'll just call it box for now, equals hive.box, and then I'll call that student box. So now I'm assigning that box that I've just opened in this line here to a variable. So now I can do stuff like box.getAt and then pass in an index. Right now this would do absolutely nothing because I've got nothing in the box, I've just simply opened it. But that's a little peek into how we will communicate with the boxes once they've got some data in them. One thing to remember before I go any further is that if you do any sort of modification to the main method before, if you need to do any sort of computations or run any sort of functions before this run app function kicks off, you need to put widgets flutter binding dot ensure initialized. Easy way to show you how Hive, how you can store things and retrieve them from Hive. I'm going to hijack this floating action button, and I'm going to create my own method. I'll just make it a void add students, say, or add students. And in this function, all I'm going to do is the exact same code that I placed above and then removed. Just going to do hive.box and then pass in the exact same name. Now this probably would be stored in a constants class, or as a you would probably put this in a constants class, just so that you don't need to go and constantly copy and paste the exact same variable name, or just store it in plain text, because if I was to quickly type it, to me glancing over it, sure that looks close enough to the student box that it must be right, but of course I don't have a box called student box. I've got a box called student box. So now that I've assigned this instance of the box to a variable, I can do things like box.add. Let me just put that back, because I do want to demonstrate something and just walk you through. So we've got two ways essentially of adding things to Hive or a box. We've got add and we've got put. Now with add, what this will do is whatever value I pass here, it'll just add that to the box, and to the front of it, it will attach an auto incrementing integer to the front of it. So the first time, if I was to do box.add and then do box.get at 0, that would go and get the first element or the first entry in the box, which if I was to run this code through would be value. So and then the second time I run this, if I wasn't to change a thing, it would add another entry of value, except I would be able to access that through 1. If I had something called if I put anything else in, it just increments automatically, and is a nice quick way of just getting something into the box. Second option is put. So that would be, you can see here we not only just assign a value, but we give it a key. So it essentially stores it as a dictionary. It will store whatever your value is along with a key, and then you can retrieve whatever entry you want based on a key, rather than trying to constantly try and get things through an index alone. Now, for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to go with add, just because it's easier. However, that's the main difference. Box.add takes in just the value, and it will automatically assign an auto incrementing ID value as the key, whereas box.put allows you to specify the value, the same as add. However, it also lets you control what key that value is stored against. So I'm going to add 2 students called Sally, and I'll add another student called Greg. Why not? And then I'm going to do a print box.get at 1. Okay, so my emulator is booted up, and I'm going to press this button down here. Now remember, try and work out for yourselves what one you think it's going to show. with a getting at 1. We've got two elements here. Is it going to say Sally or is it going to say Greg? We should see it down the bottom of this debug console right here. It says Greg. Now that is because when it does box.addSally, it's going to put the key as 0 because that's the first element in that box. Then after that it's going to do box.addGreg, and that's going to attach a 1 as the key because it's an auto incrementing integer which starts from 0. So what we've essentially done here would be the equivalent of put 0 Sally or put 1 Greg. That would work fine, and then we'd still be able to retrieve Greg by doing 1, and we'd still be able to retrieve Sally by doing 0. Or at slower speed, feel completely free. If not, just skip right ahead. Okay, so I've just made a couple of little changes. I'm just going to walk you through them as we wait for the emulator to pop up. So, I've added something called a form, which essentially just allows me to add in something called a text form field, but I can also perform validation on the text field pretty easily. So I can check for things like if it has a value, or if the value ends with something, or if the value matches something exactly, then I can perform different actions or certain actions based on whatever has been input by myself. And I have a form key and a controller, which are just defined as final variables within the widget itself. After the form field, I have two buttons in this column. I have a submit button and a delete button. Those are just down here, just to make the actual build method as small as possible. I've just separated those out into their own individual functions that will build my widgets. The buttons are absolutely identical. They're just two raised buttons, as you can see here. Same size, same font, same style. All that's different is that one has submit, one has delete, and this line here is different. So here I'm adding a value to the student box, and then right here I'm just deleting something from the student box. So happens to just be I'm deleting at number 1. So if I was to just delete this right now, this would delete at 1, which, if we remember back, would delete Greg. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to submit nothing here just to show you the form. So if I try and submit on nothing, it'll say please enter a student, which I've defined here. So I've got a validator on this text form field. So whatever the value is of this text form field, if it's empty, it'll say please enter a student. So I'll enter my name, Liam. I'll enroll myself. I press submit. We just walk through what that's done. You've seen the snack bar there saying adding student. So I've pressed my submit button, which has called this onPressed function. Now, if the form, i.e. this text field, is valid, if this hasn't failed, so in our case, as long as something's there, it's going to jump down into this submit button, and it will actually pass this. This here, this .validate, kicks off this validator here. That's how those two are linked. So it's going to create me a new builder, which just that is a widget that delegates its build to a callback. We then apply it. We've got the text, we've got this, but the main meat and bones of this is the onPressed. So if the form is valid, in our case, as long as there's something is there, it's going to go to the student box and add whatever the current value of the myController.text is. And myController is just the controller of the text form field. You can access a bunch of different parameters within it. However, if you do .text, in our case that's going to grab Liam. If I was to put Bob, then my controller.text would be Bob. So then it's going to add whatever the value of the text field is to the box, and then I'm just going to, just as a visual aid just to show that this has run successfully and it's all good, showing a snack bar just saying adding student, and then we do a print of the length of the student box. So essentially all this does is counts up how many students are in the student box, and that will print it to the console. And as you can see down here, it says 3. Previously we only had 2 because we had Sally and we had Greg. Now we've ran this tiny little app and added Liam to the student box, so now we have 3. Now I'm going to press the delete button and just get rid of the keyboard. Press the delete button, deleting student, and now you can see we only have 2. That's because if we go to this delete button widget, it's the exact same as the submit button above it, the only difference being this line here. Instead of adding the value of the text field to the box, we're deleting at 1, which in our case was Greg. This can be whatever you want. This is just for demonstration purposes. I just wanted to show that we can delete something from a box at a certain index. This could be anything at all. Say you expanded this to work with a list view, so anytime I press submit to add a student to the box, it populates a list view either above or below this form somewhere. You could pass in delete at index of the list. So if I had just imagine there's a list here. If I had Sally, Greg and Liam, and I swipe the list on Liam, that would happen. It would grab whatever the index is of Liam, pass that into this delete button widget, and then it would delete at whatever index that you've swiped on. Whatever list item you swiped on, that's what will get passed down, and that'll be the one that gets deleted from the box. In this case, I've happened to have hard-coded an index of 1. However, if I press this a couple of times and just get some students in the database, you can see in the debug console it just goes up and up and up, so we're continually adding to the box. Happens to be that there's loads of Liams in this class, and if I then press delete a bunch of times, we should see a countdown essentially from 12. 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, and so on and so forth, because it just so happens that every time we're deleting the entry in the box at index 1, and obviously every time you delete or add something, it'll shift down. So we're not always just deleting Greg. Greg's gone. But once Greg went, the first time we pressed that delete button, every other element that came after Greg gets shifted down, and that happens all automatically, and you don't need to worry about anything at all. Now, I just want to roll some footage from an app that I'd created in roughly around 8 hours, no more than that, using nothing but Flutter and Hive. And as you can see, I have made that adaptation that I suggested. I've got a list view, in which case in this instance it happens to be memories. Anytime I swipe on a certain memory, it will go detect the index that appears in the list and delete that corresponding entry in the box. As well as that, I can also click through on the photo action button and get taken to a form that looks incredibly similar to the one that we've created here in a couple of minutes, that will add a memory to the box. Navigate yourself back to the main page and the new memory will show on the list. So it's just little things like that it's less to do with actual Hive itself and more just learning the Flutter code base. Hive does not get any more complex than this. It does not get any more complex than initializing it in your main method, and please ensure that this has this comes first. You initialize it, you open the box. Once it's open, you can add and remove, you can put, you can clear it, you can do all of that. Clear would just be if I was to remove this and just do clear, that would get rid of everybody, so all the students would go. That's pretty much all I wanted to show in this video. Written a function to add students to it, as well as clearing or removing elements at specific places within the box. So yeah, any requests that you guys have, either based in Flutter or .NET, I'm all ears. As long as I'm able to describe it, then I'll make a video on it, because I do really want to break down the barrier of entry to software development and show that, you know, it's not as intimidating as some people like to make it out to be. You know, I think that anybody can make at least the most simple of applications, or the most bare bones of APIs, with next to no experience, certainly no degree. And I just want to show and explain, just in simple terms, cutting out as much jargon as I possibly can, and, you know, opening up software development to a lot more people, because it's certainly been the most rewarding thing that I've ever learned, and I'd love to share the way that I learn, the way that I explain things, and just what I've learned throughout my career so far, with as many people as would like to watch the video. So with that being said, thanks very much for sticking around. If you learned something, you can like the video if you want. And yeah, I'll see you next time. See you later.